Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Smart Mover Product Demo, Identify U.S. and Canadian Change of Address Records Before Your Next Mailing. This is Jimena Mejorado from Melissa Data. During today's webinar, our data quality analyst, Peter Brown, will show you how to use our Smart Mover component to update U.S. and Canadian movers, ensuring you have the most current addresses. You'll learn how to keep track of your customers, increase your deliverables, and save money on postage. But before we get started, I want to mention that we'll have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. I encourage you to submit your questions through the GoToMeeting interface. We'll get to as many questions as we can today. Any questions we don't have time to answer will be archived, and Peter will be happy to answer offline following today's webinar. I will also send you a link to a recording of today's webinar via email, so you can follow up on anything you missed or pass the information along to colleagues. Okay, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce Peter Brown, our data quality analyst.
Hi, this is Peter Brown, and this is our introduction to Smart Mover. So, start at the beginning. What exactly is Smart Mover? Smart Mover is Melissa Data's cloud-based National Change of Address, NCOA, or Canadian Change of Address, CCOA service. Essentially, the fundamental functionality for Smart Mover is if you can give Smart Mover a name and an address, Smart Mover can tell you whether that person has moved from that location and potentially update the address to their current address. So what can Smart Mover do for you? Well, 14% of Americans move annually. So if you have a large data sets of American contact information, then that 14% of that data is probably going to be outdated each year. Smart Mover will allow you to update your database with up-to-date addresses, allowing you to slow the degradation of your data set, keeping it up to date and current with the dynamic data-driven world we all live in. So what features does Smart Mover have beyond just the basic functionality? Well, first of all, it's a cloud-based service, and what that means is that all the major components are hosted, server-side. You don't have to worry about doing updates or doing a hefty amount of programming or having expensive hardware to run the software itself. Performance-wise, Smart Mover is able to process over 1 million records per hour, though obviously this is dependent on load times, peak hours, your distance from the server farm, et cetera, et cetera. Beyond that, Smart Mover can also standardize and parse names and addresses. And it can do this, it'll do this regardless of whether it's updating the record with a new address or not. So it can take an address, it can parse it out into street name, house number, street type, all the little details in there. And it can parse it into first name, last name, salutation, middle name, so on and so forth. Smart Mover will also return a series of result codes. It's not just, we don't just return you the data without telling you anything additional about it. We'll return a comma delimited list of result codes that can tell you whether or not that person moved. So you don't have to necessarily look at whether the address changed programmatically. You can just look for the codes and to tell whether we've updated the address or not, or whether that person's moved and we haven't been able to update the address for some reason. For instance, in some cases, if someone moved out of the country, for instance, so someone moved from the U.S. to France, we would be able to tell you that that person moved, but we wouldn't be able to update you with their current French address. But we'd be able to tell you through the result codes that they have in fact moved out of the country. We also include summary reports. This is for NCOA only, and summary reports will basically give you our PDF file that we provide a link to in the web service response. And the PDF file will show a summary of how the whole job essentially was processed, basically what the total results were. And I'll show you how to define a job when we get to the demonstration component. And further, we have NCOA versus CCOA. It's American and Canadian change of address. And they're not, while they're very similar in functionality, they're not identical. CCOA does not have the processing type, processing frequency, or months requested options. Processing type and processing frequency don't actually affect the behavior of the object itself. They're included, I believe, because the USPS requires them to be part of the any software built around the NCOA data. The months requested option, all that does is it limits how far back the object will search for moves. For instance, NCOA by default, or NCOA data goes back 48 months, but through the months requested option, you can limit that to, say, 36 months. So if someone moved in the last 36 months, you'd be able to update the address, but if they moved earlier than that, then you wouldn't be able to update it. CCOA data doesn't have the months requested option, but does go back 72 months instead of the 48 for NCOA. CCOA also, as I mentioned before, does not have the summary reports that NCOA does. And so that's kind of just a basic overview of the features of the service. I think right now I'll just go right into a brief demonstration of Smart Mover. So this is an application I've written in .NET that basically allows me to send a single record to the web service and get the response back and view the XML response. So you see, I'll just enter a name. I should include a last name too. And you'll need the full name for this to work well. And address line 1, city, state, zip. Hit process. You'll see here that I got the address. In this case, the address was standardized, but was not updated because I have not moved from this address just yet. And you'll see here the CSO2 code indicates that this person has not moved from that address. And the ASO1 basically indicates that this is a valid address. But we also append some data like the delivery point code. We have the zip +4 instead of just the 5-digit zip. Carrier address type code, et cetera, et cetera. I mentioned earlier that we have summary reports that are associated with something called jobs. Essentially, in the request, you can add some, you can include something called the job ID, and this is defined entirely by you. And so, with the job ID, basically any request made with that same job ID will be included in that job, and we will provide summary reports. We'll provide you a link with the summary report for all the requests that were made under that job ID. So here I have webinar test 3 is the job ID. So I hit process. You'll see here that included in the XML response, we have the CAS report link and the NCR report link. The NCR report link is kind of the thing we really want to look at right now. And I can just take that. I can get to highlight the right number of characters. Take that and enter that into a web browser. And you'll see here you'll get the summary for my one record that I ran under that job. However, see if I do a different record under that same job ID. You'll see that this address was updated. I'll get back to that in a minute. But let's go here. Live demo. I guess this must not have been updated yet. Here we go. So here we have, so now it's been updated to show that 2 records have been run under that job. It'll show like all the number of codes that have been returned for each job and how many have been moved and so on and so forth. Going back to this, so you see here that in this case, this this record I entered, this person moved from the initial address has been updated with the new address. So we started with 2120 Wedgemont Place, Bakersfield, California, 93311, and we ended up at 4415 Witter Road, Langley, Washington. And you see here we include codes that indicate that this person moved, that we were able to update it with the current address, and that this was an individual move as opposed to, say, like a business move. Also in Smart Mover, we have additional columns that can be output in the response. And they're selected by basically nominating them in the columns field. Right here, I just hit the checkbox, and they say they'll be included. If I hit all these, I get substantially more information in the response. In this case, we'll see that there's been parsed address details, so that we get the parsed information for the address, including the street name in its own field, the street suffix in its own field. And we also get the name information back, so we see the full name along with the parsed first and last name out. We also get the original group, and this group of fields will include the original unaltered input data. So you see we have the starting address that's not been standardized or touched in any way, along with the city and zip code and state, and the standardized group. And this will return the input data, but it's been standardized, updated with additional data. So you see that the address has been modified to have mixed casing. The zip has, included the zip +4, so on and so forth, along with the delivery point code. Kind of going over some of the stuff here at the top. I already mentioned before the some of the options, processing type, whether you're doing basically whether the data set includes just a standard mixed data set, or if it's mostly individuals or businesses or residential. Doesn't really affect the behavior. This is mostly included just because the USPS requires it, along with list owner frequency processing. This mostly just determines basically you select how often you process the list, but again doesn't really affect the behavior of the object. Number of months requested, again I already spoke about this, but essentially you can define whether it goes back the full 48 months looking for records to update, or you can select a smaller number if you so desire. And the actions field, if I mentioned, currently the actions will take either NCOA or CCOA as input. It's defining which object you're using. However, at the current time, we have to have NCOA and CCOA behind different URLs because basically the laws in both U.S. and Canada require us to host those data files on their home soil. So at present, the actions field doesn't really do anything. It's included for now because in the future, well, for one, we'd hope to somehow have both NCOA and CCOA behind the same URL at some point. And two, we hope to add certain features that will be exploited through that field. And that's pretty much the demo. So I think now we're going to go into Q&A. So,
Thank you, Peter. The floor is now open for questions. If you have any questions, please type them in right now. And while you type those in, I just want to remind you that I will be sending out a link to a recording of today's webinar. You should expect to receive it via email by the end of the week.
So 14% seems low, but we thought it was more in the same 20% SmartMove manages moves, but a person still has to find out of deceased records to avoid mailers directed to those addresses. How would you recommend going about this to make an even stronger and up-to-date mail list? So 14% is a statistic I get from the Census Bureau, maybe a little out of date, but that's kind of the stat I'm going to keep going with. In terms of deceased, I believe that we don't currently offer a solution for finding out whether someone is deceased or not. I think that's something we're currently working with, implementing with our person data product along with other demographic data. So I think that's something to stay tuned to, and hopefully we'll have more on that in the future. Thank you for that, Nicholas. I'm going to butcher this, but Nicholas Pua. How can you run one address at a time through NCOA link when the USPS requires 100 unique records for processing? I'm not sure. I think that our previous version of SmartMover required 100 unique records. The current version we were able to reduce it down to one, allowing us to use the REST protocol for the web service. I'm not sure how we're able to do that. Best guess is that USPS must have softened their requirements on that based on maybe a common sense guarantee that most people will be running more than 100 unique records per job.
I see a question saying somebody arrived late and they want to know if they'll be getting a recording of the demo. You will be getting a recording. You can expect to receive an email from us by the end of the week.
Okay. Okay. No, it doesn't. I just answered it. So I'll do this one.
Did you demo how to connect this to your database or data file? I came in late.
No. It's a web service, so essentially what you'd have to do to connect it to a database or a data file, you'd have to programmatically basically convert whatever the database or data file, whatever format it is in, into either an XML or a SOAP or a REST or a JSON request. And then send that on, and then you'd have to take the response and then convert that back into the format you need. I believe that we're soon going to be, we have a SmartMover component for SSIS, and soon it will be updated to the current version, which I demoed here. And that includes CCOA, and that will make it easier to attach it to whatever database or data file you might be using. It's a snapshot updated periodically. Or NCOA data, the question is from Brian Long. Is this going against live NCOA data or is the snapshot updated periodically? The NCOA data is updated weekly from the USPS. And so basically it's a snapshot that's updated every week. Is SmartMove web-based? Yes. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, this is a web service hosted on our servers, and it can be used basically from anything with internet access that you can access a web service with. It's very flexible. So in other words, Mary Callahan asks, so in other words, we get the data back from you and then somehow import internally to whatever we are using to print or update our database? Essentially, yes. Like I said, it's a web service. So really all it is that you need to somehow programmatically or through SSIS convert it to and from like an XML request and response. And how you do that specifically is generally specific to the programming languages. However, every programming language I've used has some means of doing that, and then converting it, into whatever format you use. I've seen code with using web services written in PHP, .NET, Java, C++, C#, VB, every language under the sun. Does it work with cloud-based CRMs? I do not think that we have direct support for any CRMs with our web services. Any integration would have to be done on your end. I'm not saying it can or can't be done. It's kind of specific to the CRM, but generally the web service itself is flexible enough, and XML is such a common and flexible format that should be possible to integrate it into just about any real development software. Besides XML, what are the output options from Brian Long? Besides XML, we have JSON. We also have REST and SOAP, but those will both output in effectively XML as well. JSON's kind of the real alternative there. Do you get monthly database updates for CCOA from Castanella Tanasuka? If not, how updated it is the data that you're using? CCOA is updated monthly, yeah. So NCOA updated weekly, CCOA updated monthly. Any other questions? I think I've got all the ones so far.
Do NCOA and CCOA come together as one product, or are they separate?
They're essentially separate products. We group them together because they just have the same request and response schema, and they're pretty much functionally identical. But they're separate prices, and you have to, you can obviously buy both together, but they're sort of separate products. If one moves from US to Canada, does the data appear correct? It does not, because the data files have to be hosted on separate servers. We cannot update a US address with a Canadian address. It's still considered a foreign address. Similarly, from Canada to the US. Simply because we have to host those data files in separate countries, it's hard to use them adequately. What is the cost? I think after this we'll send an email with the pricing plan to all the attendees. I don't know it off the top of my head. I'm an engineer, not a salesman.
So it looks like we're out of time. I don't see any more questions, so if you think of any additional questions, you can contact him by email or phone. His information is provided on the screen. And I just want to thank you again for joining us today in today's webinar, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Ooh, wait, there's one more question. So real quick, just one more question. How is this different from your listware product? I believe listware only works with Excel. I think if I remember, unless I'm completely blanking, listware is an attachment for Microsoft Excel. It can only work on that platform, whereas this is a much more flexible and broad product.
Okay, thank you.